Please welcome back to the stage Patrick Tucker, Science and Technology Editor for Defense One, along with Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Warren, the Spark Division Chief at AFWorks, Soonmin Kim, the Chief of Policy at the Defense Innovation Unit, and Michael Horowitz, the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Development and Emerging Capabilities at the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense.
Okay. Thank you guys for sticking around. I know that lunch is next, and there's always that thing when you hear that food's about to serve, that's right when your blood sugar gets to its lowest, it has an actual reaction. But this is a pretty essential panel because all morning we've been hearing about science and physics and huge technical challenges to breakthrough technology. There's a lot of business challenges, and there's a lot of Defense Department specific business challenges to making all of this stuff into reality, and also getting it to the field. So I want to just go down the line real quick. Soonmin, starting with you, just introduce who you are and what you do, ending up with Mike, and talk a little bit about your portfolio. But go ahead, Soonmin, please.
Hi, everyone. My name is Soonmin Kim. I'm the Chief of Policy at the Defense Innovation Unit. I joined DIU about 4 months ago, and my role is, as you would guess, leading policy, which essentially means tech policy. So developing a policy agenda out of all the DIU tech portfolios. The second part of my job is the Defense Innovation Community of Entities, which I'm sure we'll get to. And then the third part is DIU director, becoming a principal staff assistant, trying to work within the OSD enterprise to make sure that we're codifying his or her roles within the OSD policy that currently exists.
Okay, real quick show of hands. Who here knows what DIU is? Get them up. Okay, pretty good. Write your congressman, say they need more money. Go ahead.
Jennifer
Warren, yes.
Hi, I'm Lieutenant Colonel Jen Warren. I am the Spark Division Chief at AFWorks. If you're unfamiliar with AFWorks, we are the innovation arm of the Department of the Air Force. So we include both Air Force and Space Force equities. We were set up a handful of years ago under the Air Force Research Laboratory. And what we did is we consolidated all the small business innovative research funding across the department into one place to ideally make it easy to do business with the government. And so within AFWorks, we have 3 main lines of effort. We have one you'll hear is ventures, which is where we manage that SBIR funding. And we try to run it a little bit like venture capital, right? Taking a lot of risk, being very early on in tech, and really trying to work with the market to understand our military challenges so that you can consider it for dual use design in your technologies. And then we also have the primes, which the prime division is focused on how do we accelerate commercial maturation faster than commercial demand. So if you've already got something in the mix, we think it would be amazing for the military, but where it's going on the demand cycle is moving a little too slow for us. We do some very specific investments to try to move those particular technology areas forward in a very collaborative fashion where we don't drive exact requirements like a traditional program, but instead make sure you understand our challenges. And the last is Spark Division, which I recently stepped into the leadership position of. And with Spark Division, it's intrapreneurship. So it's how we take airman and guardian ideas and move them through the bureaucracy to actually get them fielded. So as you can imagine, program management offices and big vendors, they're working on really big stuff, like how do I make sure the airplane flies safely? And whether or not, when we get down to these really frontline things, the experience of the frontline airman or guardian really informs what the art of the possible is and what would make their lives better. And so then they're able to take their technical expertise and then we pair that with our network, some money and contracts, and navigate through the system to try to get those fielded. Whether that, and transition here is whether that's getting something on the GSA schedule, whether it's the government to buy it as a service, or it moves into a major program of record.
Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Jennifer Warren. Can I call you Jennifer? Is that okay?
Please, Jen.
Jen? Before we move on to Mike, what is AFWorks' total budget to do all
So our total budget just for the SBIR program is $1.4 billion a year. And then we've got a handful of millions across Prime and Spark as well. And so, and a lot of that is on the Prime budget is influenced by congressional interest items. And then for Spark, we get a significant amount of our money from the Squadron Innovation Fund that's run by the Air Force Vice Chief.
Okay.
And so overall, you're looking at, over $1 billion annually.
Okay. All right. Mike Horowitz from OSD, real quick.
Sure. Mike Horowitz, I'm the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Development and Emerging Capabilities. My office has 3 missions. The first is to work at the policy level to try to accelerate emerging capability development, but responsibly. So both promoting norms of responsible behavior for emerging capabilities, as well as clearing policy barriers that can prevent adoption. The second is force development. We run the process through which the department takes the national defense strategy at the macro level and converts it into guidance for everyone from the military services to DIU for where they should be investing their money to try to generate the biggest bang for the buck in line with the views of the Secretary of Defense. And the third is we oversee the AUKUS initiative, the Australia, US, UK initiative on behalf of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for strategy, plans, and capabilities.
Great. Mike's with OSD, so you don't have to write your congressman to ask more money for him. He's probably writing
Policy has no money.
Explaining why.
I can't help you.
Yeah, exactly. Mike, let's stick with you for a second. Well, a lot of us are familiar with AUKUS. Not as many folks are familiar with the Pillar 2 of AUKUS, and that's actually much more focused on bringing together partners and allies as part of a broader effort to create innovation, right, across these 3 partners. And when I think of ways to tackle innovation, I usually don't go to make a larger committee and make sure that people that have to respond to other laws and governance structures are involved in a discussion. So how do you square this? How do you enter into a dialogue with other partners on how to innovate when the Defense Department has such trouble sometimes moving its own innovation up to the front line?
So AUKUS is grounded in the National Defense Strategy and the essential insight in the strategy that America cannot go it alone when it comes to innovation. And that succeeding in the 21st century and with regard to the PRC pacing challenge requires closer collaboration with allies and partners, since allies and partners are our comparative advantage. And AUKUS is a way that we're getting after that. And so it's true, in theory, I guess, that, bringing more people to the table doesn't make decisions easier. But if you bring the right people to the table, you can have a real impact. So, for example, DIU has launched an innovation challenge under AUKUS with its counterparts in the UK and Australia. For example, the P-8 offices, our P-8 maritime surveillance aircraft in all 3 countries. We've deployed a algorithm developed trilaterally that's rolling out on the P-8s for in each country to detect and process sonobuoy data from each other's sonobuoys, which enhances our anti-submarine warfare capabilities. And then we're also lowering the barriers for industry to be able to collaborate. With the support of the Hill, which has provided strong bipartisan support for AUKUS, Australia and the UK are on track to receive a exemption from the ITAR, from the International Traffic in Arms regulations that industry has argued for decades create obstacles to close collaboration between countries. So making the national defense strategy real means industry needs to be able to work together. And the 2024 NDAA lays out an ITAR exemption for Australia and the UK for both classified and unclassified defense articles that will enable essentially an unprecedented level of defense industrial-based collaboration between the 3 countries that we think will both realize the ambitions of the president and his counterparts when it comes to AUKUS, but also deliver what the joint force needs in the 21st century.
Let me take that to Sunman, because he just mentioned DIU. When DIU was pitched to me by Ash Carter, it was very much like, we are going to take what's actually happening in Silicon Valley. We're going to start to contract by the rules that they understand. We're going to get it into the Defense Department, and we're going to reorganize the whole thing. But more and more, the international partners are playing a role in this, and also international experiences. So, for instance, DIU just sponsored a hackathon in Ukraine, and I cover Ukraine with deep passion, because this is where I see a mission that is deeply aligned with my own personal values, but also deep technological innovation happening at the point of relevance. A little bit of insights from what you just saw in Ukraine and how that applies to this.
Yes. So this was part of our NATO Ukraine Defense Innovators Forum, which was actually in Krakow, Poland. So we held it just across the border.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a 3-day summit where we brought together both Ukrainian warfighters, government officials, both from NATO and partnering countries, as well as a bunch of folks from our autonomy team, mainly because autonomy is a technology area that we're really focused on with Ukraine right now.
Mm-hmm.
The hackathon was a 2-day, 48-hour-long hackathon. We have 13 teams participate in it, and with the goal of being able to build an autonomous capability to do the last mile point A to B flight in a contested environment. So out of the 13 teams, we have 3 teams that were able to actually deliver a capability, and the winning team was actually a teamed effort between the Ukrainians and the Norwegians. And they were able to beat out, sort of the traditional hackathon winners that we see here, which are Stanford, MIT grads. We had some of those as well, but we were really happy to see sort of the impact that being able to see actual warfighting capability, how to connect the warfighter capability to technical talent, how we were able to sort of not field it, but be able to deliver a prototype within 48 hours.
And so this test, you're throwing electronic warfare at them. You're like really sort of trying to simulate a real world Ukrainian environment against these things that these guys are just making over the course of 48 hours. And yet the F-35 takes 10 years. So that brings up a couple of things that I think we want to get into a little bit. Number one is how do you build trusted autonomy, especially as you broaden that discussion to more players, which the United States has to do. But also the essentialness of bottom-up innovation, going to actual warfighters, going to actual operators, and centering their experiences as part of the design process. So Jen, that's very much what AFWERX does. A couple of things that you've seen lately that show you both where AFWERX, but also the broader department is getting it right. And then a moment or two on some challenges that centering of the warfighter experience still faces.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I know. It's how I roll.
So let's talk about AFWERX and autonomy first. And so we have a few different efforts that we've done in this area, but I think one of the ones I'm most excited about and that's most unique to how we do business is Autonomy Prime. Mm-hmm. So we understand out of the 4 primes we have that Autonomy Prime is geared to try to bring more commercial R&D into the ecosystem. And we want to make sure that you're not guessing at what the problem sets are for the DoD as you design commercially, right? We're all about commercial dual use. Our boss is actually the chief commercialization officer for the Department of the Air Force. Mm-hmm. And so we have this thing called the Autonomy Proving Ground that we just set up at Duke Field near Eglin in Florida. And so we provide this place where people can come and test autonomous aircraft. And what's different is that, from what I understand, it's very expensive and it's very hard to find a place where you can test your autonomous aircraft. Mm-hmm. And we actually now, can you find a range master that trusts this, right? Most range masters, they're very focused on aircraft. They know what they know. They're experts in that. And if they're not comfortable in this new area, then they're not going to get engaged. So with the Autonomy Proving Ground, we've got range masters that are trained in autonomy. And we've also got software that creates a safety envelope. So what happens is if the autonomous aircraft creates a signal that takes it out of the safety envelope, it negates that signal, it ignores it. And so now you've got this technological trust and you've got the trust of the range master. And we provide this service to companies for free. Why would we do that? Well, because if somebody's got to go pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to go test their autonomous equipment, we have now completely ignored so many small businesses. And that is not what we're about, right? We do 1,700 contracts a year across that 1.4 billion. That means I'm not concentrating on just a few companies. We do contracts that are on the larger side, but the grand majority are very petite because we are trying to get in on the early side. And we are trying to break down some of those institutional barriers so that the creativity from industry can come. Mm-hmm. We're not saying I need it to fly this far and it's got to carry this much. We don't do that. What we do is we partner, we figure out where those bottlenecks are, and we try to loosen those up. And I'm really excited about the autonomy proving ground is like one of the key new ways of doing business where we're providing a service to industry so that they can innovate.
Yeah.
And I've already forgotten the second part of your
No,
question.
that's okay. We'll get back to it because I wanted to talk a little bit more about international understandings around autonomy, because Mike, one of the things that you helped put together for the Defense Department is an international partnership around AI use. France, South Korea, UK, others. I forget how many people are part of that partnership now. But yeah, go ahead.
No. So the department, working with the State Department last year, the U.S. launched the Political Declaration on Responsible Military Use of AI and Autonomy. This is the first ever international agreement on military uses of artificial intelligence, and it's grounded in the experience that DoD, the decades of experience that DoD has with AI and autonomy, and that some of our allies and partners have in developing and deploying it safely and responsibly. So it's a set of strong norms designed to help encourage the rest of the world to learn lessons and capacity build based on all these experiences. It's a forum where the world can work together to ensure that military uses of AI and autonomy are developed and deployed in a safe and responsible way. And we're really proud that 55 countries have now endorsed the political declaration, signaling its growing support internationally. I think it's a really clear example of how the United States and how the Department of Defense in particular can really be a leader internationally when it comes to AI and autonomy.
Okay, so this is fascinating because you remember the conversation that the entire country was having a few years ago about Project Maven and whether or not we could trust the United States military to develop artificial intelligence, and that is largely a product of a lot of consumption of science fiction. Is kind of led a lot of our understanding about that. But what we're seeing is, in part because of the AI ethical principles list that the Defense Department has put out, and also this outreach effort to other countries, to partners and allies, we're developing an international understanding among democracies about responsible use of AI in warfare. That's pretty exciting. But I want to take that over to you, Sunmin, because you just led a hackathon with guys that came over to Krakow, but they have to deal with the policy implications, the ethical implications of responsible AI all the time, and they have to do so in a setting that is well outside of the sort of policy scope. So talk to us a little bit. You also talked to Silicon Valley folks, and a lot of the discussion about whether or not to even partner with U.S. military on AI. It comes out of folks, the coding and engineering community in Silicon Valley and some of their reservations. So your thoughts on where you see an understanding of the ethical use of AI touching the military, touching non-traditional players, and touching international partners. How do you make sure, and it's not necessarily your job to figure this out today, but talk a little bit about that. What do we do to make sure that we can innovate at the speed that the Ukrainians need it, while also making sure that the French, the UK, the United States government, the US taxpayer, the British taxpayer, the French taxpayer feel reassured about these endeavors?
That's another big question.
Yeah.
So I think there's three main things. One is, as a policy effort, so I used to be at the Joint AI Center when we were writing the DoD AI ethical principles, and DIU back then was actually the first component that came to the JAIC and said, hey, like, wearing our hat as we're supposed to be the gateway to Silicon Valley, here's how we can contribute to this conversation. And what DIU came up with was the RAI guidelines. So it's essentially a set of questions that we, by we, I mean DIU now, ask our AI companies to answer as they respond to our commercial solutions openings. So that's one example of sort of in the DoD policy-led effort where DIU fits in.
Mm-hmm.
I think the second bucket of things is actually on test and evaluation, which is the big thing that we saw out of our Krakow event. The need for faster development testing and being able to deploy different software packages to things that are actually being fielded right now.
Mm-hmm.
This is something that we at DIU have seen the past couple of years, unrelated to Ukraine, but things in our AI and autonomy portfolio. A lot of our vendors, came to us saying, "Hey, we're just like you were saying, we have a hard time getting access to range time. The ranges are mainly prioritized service-led efforts because they're funded by TRMC, which is, they're supposed to fund service T&E organizations, or they're sort of owned by the Director of Operation Test and Evaluation, which only does things that are on the congressionally directed oversight list. So there is this gap, I think, within OSD of OSD-led capabilities. How are these capabilities supposed to get access to government-owned test facilities? So we're a big user of your guys' Proving Grounds. We also have sort of our own commercial version of Proving Grounds as well out of our human systems portfolio.
Yeah.
But if you think about how do you scale that, DIU cannot be the test service organization for everything that falls out of the services or out of DOT&E's oversight list. I think one solution is, having there be a new T&E pathway. This is something that, in the House passed NDA directs DIU to do. The way that DoD normally thinks about T&E is this is a data that you have to collect in order to pass to the next acquisition milestone. Yeah. Which is really hardware centric, and it's not the way that we've been seeing in the commercial sector or in Ukraine of how T&E is sort of prioritized and developed.
Okay. I want to go to that real quick because private companies, depending on if they have a strong commercial use for their technology, will figure out their testing and evaluation, like locations and things like that. For some of the smaller companies that both of you are working with, do we have sufficient testing facilities to scale up the production of some of the things that Defense Department leaders are highlighting are critical for the next conflict, like these small attributable drones that we're going to mass produce? Do we have testing to continue to innovate and build these things out? Facilities?
I don't know. To be honest, we really work on the early side, right? We're not in the business of acquiring at AFWorks. What we do is we have lots of different mechanisms to try to help people cross the valley of death and transition in multiple different ways. Mm-hmm. But I'll admit, I do not know how it looks like with our T&E infrastructure versus our overall need. Do you?
That's okay.
I think we're beginning to find out. Replicator is the big initiative that we are leading for the Deputy Secretary right now. And part of that is trying to find out what are the gaps we have in the department's infrastructure in order to move at the speed of the publicly stated goal. So I think T&E infrastructure is one of them.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I want to come back to the Sybers issue for a second because one of the future primes of tomorrow, some of the most important technology companies that are very information technology forward come out of this process. And you mentioned that one of them was actually Anduril. Mm-hmm. So really quickly, are there some companies here that you're working with today that sort of look like a future Anduril that you want to?
Oh, I don't know about that. I don't admittedly know the details of all. We do 1,700 contracts a year, so please be patient with me that I'm not able to pick out specific companies, but
maybe pick out a problem area that's going to be the sort of thing that a future Anduril can go at.
So AFWorks does not drive so one of the things that I will admit, the Department of the Air Force, we know internally we struggle with providing a clear demand signal to industry. That is something that we have a problem with. And we know it, and we're working on it. And the re-optimization for great power competition, which is the phraseology we're using for, we are completely reorganizing how the Air Force is structured, is trying to get after that. And we're hoping that with the stand-up of the Integrated Development Office and the Integrated Capability, ICC and IDO, I don't remember the exact acronyms, that these are going to help provide that clearer demand signal. But what I do say is that the way that AFWorks approaches the market, we have two different ways that we do within the Sybers. So Sybers are very specifically legally controlled, and not just the Air Force and the Space Force, but just about every government agency, whether it's the National Science Foundation, the Defense Health Agency, almost all of them, if they have an R&D budget, they have a Cyber budget. So if you've got something that maybe works for different customer sets, you can look elsewhere, right? Or with us. And so for Sybers, there's part of it is where we say, what is it that we're going after? And at AFWorks, we don't drive those requirements, but instead government partners, come to us and they say, I have a problem.
Okay.
And what we really like to do, if we like something that we're getting very excited about and it's maturing, is we run people, we actually offer a challenges process where if they come into the challenges program, it's a non-competitive area where industry and government can talk about the problem, but it's not just like, okay, we're here to talk and then we're done talking and like, cool, I can't run a business on talking. So there's a commercial solutions offering that comes with that. And so for instance, with our Sky High Relief Challenge, we had the problem that we don't have adequate relief bladders for female pilots in flight. And so we brought more than, I think it's 50 companies. And with that particular program, because it's not SIBRs, we can do from small to large. Like with our Super Goggles Challenge, Apple is one of our participants. And so if you run through the challenge program, what happens is like we have this very open dialogue. It's not a traditional industry day where my books are closed and I'm going to talk directly to the government, or I'm going to talk to one contractor and nobody is going to share because competition is on the line. Instead, what we find, one of the halo effects of this, if you will, is that companies are learning about each other when they come to these challenges, or our colliders, which is a slightly different variant. And then they're able to say, oh, maybe we'll combine forces and we'll be more marketable to the government. So for Sky High, we started with about 50 companies. I think we put about 20 on contract, and then did a bit of a bake-off, and now we're with one company, and we're running about 60 test flights that are gonna be across, I think it's 5 airframes, to test this equipment. And so when we see things like this, like Anduril, for instance, they started as a SIBR company with the Air Force and with Customs and Border Patrol, I believe, actually. Yeah. And so they've evolved and they've matured, and every SIBR has gotten at a different way of maturing their technology. And so, but then what happened is Anduril became mature and they kind of graduated from our program, which we love. And then they came to us and they shared, you know what? We met Blue Force Technologies, who is part of the SIBR portfolio as well. They had just won what we call a strategic funding increase, a StratFi. And so they bought out Blue Force Technologies to bring that materials element. And then shortly thereafter, we're seeing them compete and win Air Force contracts and Navy contracts. And that is not the path for every company to become a big company, but it is really exciting for us when somebody who started with that non-dilutive capital, when the company is fragile, to get access to that talent, to be able to develop their technologies when they're still uncertain, and then evolve with that knowledge that they have by interacting with us, and then to grow to where that company sees is right for them, is really exciting. Because our thing is that we want that when somebody goes to the market and they're saying, this is the thing I'm looking for, that it exists, and that we haven't squeezed out or solidified into so few vendors that these new innovative ideas aren't able to reach market and be able to be something that we can buy commercially.
It sounds like a startup accelerator. It sounds sort of like a combinator.
Absolutely. And we actually have something within AFWorks that is specifically an not an AI accelerator, an innovation accelerator for the Airman and Guardian ideas. It's called the Refinery. And so with the Refinery, we take these Airman and Guardian ideas and we say, okay, what is it that they need to get through the valley of death, if you will, right? Everybody talks about the valley of death. We actually get there. And so one of the really exciting ones that's going on right now is, if I'm honest, it's shocking that we even have to address this. But okay, so imagine you've got a cargo aircraft and it's got a ramp. And that ramp has an angle. And now I have support equipment that I carried via this airplane, and I need to get it off the plane. That angle of that ramp is really important to make sure that stuff doesn't bottom out. How do we fix the angle of that ramp today? Plywood. So we're buying a ton of plywood. We're flying it all over the world. It takes up space. It's super heavy. And oh, by the way, when we fly internationally, super controlled. Or we go and we deploy somewhere, we hide our plywood away. And then when we go to pack up and leave, it's gone. And then we can't procure anymore. It gets really complicated, and this is such a simple problem, but the bureaucracy makes it so hard for us to get all the little checks and all the yeses to say, yes, I can do something different. And so some airmen started working with a company that does race car ramps. And so like imagine, you go out to Pebble Beach or whatever, and they drive the car onto the stage, onto a very small ramp. So it's already weighted, it's already like set up for high poundage and whatnot. So all we did is we took measurements and requirements for the aircraft and then are working with this company to design ramps that meet our specifications. And now we've got something that's lightweight, something that's foldable, something we can store in the corner of the airplane. And we've just freed up and they're reusable, and we don't have these import of wood problems.
Yeah.
And so where they are is, okay, so they've got the prototype, and then the refinery, they're like, all right, how are we going to make this happen? We talked to the depot for the C-130s out at Robbins, and we said, hey, can we borrow a plane for the day? They're like, sure. So we brought together all these people, couple different program offices. There's there's a working group that affects this sort of stuff. Basically, anybody that could tell us no or tell us yes, we brought them together on very short order, said, we got a plane, we got some stuff, come check it out. They all sent people.
Yeah.
We ran this test in a day. Huge. Everybody is excited. They're high-fiving all around the room. We get the requirements documentation figured out. And then somebody even brings up, they're like, oh, for like an MQ-9, I need a different angle. They're like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. So then we can adjust, but we try to design for like an 80% solution, because we know if we try to go for 100, it'll never happen.
Yeah.
But the fact that we bring all these people together who all want to get to yes, but there were just, how would we even, it's such an inexact navigation.
Yeah.
That we get to yes, and now they are moving to like go into the next round of production with this company with the new requirements.
Yeah. See, this is great, because you get a sense of like, this is in answer to the question, like, what is the next Anduril? You see it emerging problem by problem, conversation by conversation. And that's actually what the big blockbuster defense prime of the future looks like. It looks like something that's attacking individual problems in a way that's now being defined and argued a little bit better than in the past. But I bring up Anduril because I want to go to you, Mike, and give you a problem that you can't possibly solve. Anduril was in my mailbox recently. They signed a deal with the Royal Australian Navy and the Defense Science and Technology Group in May 2022 to develop prototypes of a submarine drone. And they have one that's like manufacture ready by 2025. Why can't we do that?
Us?
Yeah.
I think if you look at the portfolio of capabilities that the U.S. military is developing and that the Navy is developing in some of these spaces, there's actually a lot of exciting innovation going on. I'll pick on DIU in a positive way again, since Sun Min is here, and point out the CSO that they released for large diameter UUV.
Yeah.
Which is an example of a kind of capability that we think that the Joint Force needs in the future, and that everybody thinks that we need to accelerate UUV development. But I think one of the things that we are working on in some ways is how do we better connect some of the earlier stage innovation that's happening, sort of something like what an AFWorks is doing.
Yeah. Some
of the outreach to commercial industry that somebody like Sunmin is doing. What our requirements process looks like from the perspective of the joint staff, and then what service acquisition actually looks like on the back end. Since we know that there are multiple valleys of death here, but one of them involves that gap between prototypes and scaling.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at what we're doing in the UUV space specifically, what you see is actually a lot of interesting innovation happening, and now we're getting ready to make the next jump, and those are conversations that I think are ongoing between the innovation ecosystem in the department, the Navy, DoD leadership, et cetera.
Yeah, and if you talk to folks that run the Joint Requirements Oversight Council, they'll tell you requirements, they want to hack and destroy and rebuild that thing too. Like they are moving towards a state where they want sort of data forward requirements that emerge up rather than this fatwa that comes down that messes up everyone's life and results in a program that's obsolete by the time it develops a prototype. Questions? Yep, over here.
Thank you. Georgina DiNardo, Inside Defense. So I wanted to go back to the testing stuff you were talking about before. back in, I believe, September, a report came out that found that DoD didn't have any testing facilities that could realistically test autonomous and AI systems to their full extent. So it recommended that portable testing kits were implemented instead to realistically test systems. One, is that something DIU is using to go forward in the future, or is there another solution they're doing? And then also, in that sense, how are replicator capabilities being tested by DoD then, if the ranges can't fully evaluate them? Thank you.
Yeah, so from the DIU perspective, the way that we test so I should sort of back up. So the way that DIU does autonomy is either we spend our own money doing it, which up until this fiscal year, we barely had any, or we spend other people's money, other people in the government, and those are the sort of the project owners. So take, for example, if we were working with a service organization and we do the contracting for that organization, the services would primarily be in charge of being able to satisfy the T&E requirements. So we can either write those into the contracts where a DIU PM will, make sure to price out how we're going to do T&E so that the services can feed those T&E requirements to their oversight folks, be able to scale up those projects in order to be able to transition. So that's sort of one model where we can either do the T&E for our DoD customers, or if it's one of our projects, then we do our own T&E. And we either get access to the government-owned test ranges, such as the service T&E organizations that TRMC funds, or it will be done through one of our own test infrastructure, things like what I mentioned before, the proving grounds. So those are the two ways that DIU for autonomy currently does testing. And then for replicator, so I can't talk about the specific list of replicator capabilities, but we have said publicly, it's a mix of service owned as well as, other DoD owned autonomous capabilities. So all of those capabilities have their own test requirements based on the performance criteria of the capabilities as well as where in the department those sit. One of the things that replicator is currently very much focused on is how do we bring together the enterprise capabilities. So that's something that we've been working a lot with CDAO, or the DoD Chief Digital and AI Officer. They own things like AI and autonomy scaffolding, which provide the data labeling, T&E, as well as data management and hosting services, that not just DIU projects, but any, I think it's available for anyone in the department with AI or autonomy projects to use. So that is one example of, an enterprise capability that I think if we were to scale something like Replicator needs to be fully matured. And as Replicator goes on, one of our goals is one of the policy lessons learned that we're hoping to gather is, are there other gaps in enterprise capabilities that the department needs to invest in order to move at the speed that we would like to?
Yeah, that's the thing about Replicator. It's not just contracts for switchblades. It's an ongoing process that, is going to keep iterating. So let's find another question. I think that we do have one in the, yeah.
Thank you very much for talking today about these concepts. My name is Sean Merritt. I work for Microsoft and focus on the Navy team. One of the items I wanted to bring up is kind of a boring item, but very, very important for the speed of flash to bang. We get really excited about speeding contracts, landing the dollar, being able to do these things, getting to research and development. But I spend a considerable amount of time telling Navy mission owners, you're just going to have to wait a minute because there's not an authority to operate on this item yet. So one of the challenges is that I would equate it to trying to build a whole town all at once, but only having one person doing permits. And so stunningly undermanned accountability offices and accreditation offices to be able to make that happen. I tell people all the time, if you were Walmart, we could do this next week. But because this is Navy and because it's not ATO'd, it may be as much as 2 years before you'll be able to do this inside your command. So I wondered if you could comment on that. And I appreciate the support and the push that you're making in these areas. Thank you.
I'll start at the tactical level, or do you prefer to? Okay, so we actually on my team we recognized, we did research and we found out that because we are so dedicated to getting past any sort of seeming of innovation theater, right? We got to be about it. I cannot just prototype and be successful. So we did research and we found that there were 4 main things that we call the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that stop businesses from transitioning the valley of death. You, number 1, got one. That's the biggest one, is risk management framework, getting authorities to operate, to connect to or put data on a defense network. One is airworthiness certification. One is human subject research. And another one is electromagnetic spectrum clearance. And on my team, we have just set up, we are doing 3 different things to specifically get after this problem. Because again, with AFWorks, we deal with such volume that if I'm awarding 1,700 contracts a year, a lot of those need RMF clearance, and a lot of them don't even, in our research, we found many of them didn't even recognize that they needed this. So part of it is that we're providing education to companies very early, because we all know that designing for accessibility and security early is important. Number 2, we have created an RMF 101 course that is open to government and industry in partnership with the Department of the Air Force CIO's office. And so we ran the first one in May, and there's going to be more, so you can check Defense Acquisition University. We're also doing an experiment with Cloud One, and we have an authorizing official who is willing to experiment with us, who we are trying to create a place where, and we're trying with companies of different technology maturity to figure out how we can safely test and demonstrate capabilities while they're still early, because we recognize we've got this chicken and the egg thing that, like, you got this cool technology, but if it doesn't have an ATO, then I'm not interested. So we're trying to create an intermediate place, and we have some backing to do that we're going to do on a small scale first with Cloud One to try to get after that.
Okay. Well, normally discussions about defense contracting and international agreements and partnerships around ethics are not as fun as this one was. So this was great. I'm so glad that you guys were here to help iron out, like, a lot of the ways we as a nation working with partners and allies can get at these massive challenges of actually taking the innovations that we have and putting them out in front of people. I feel a lot better knowing this, and I wish we could go on forever, but it's time for lunch. So thank you guys so much for being here with me today.